Hello and welcome to the Champions of Happy podcast, the podcast where I talk to my friends about what makes them happy, what makes them smile, and what brings them joy. Hi everyone, I hope you're all having fantastic, lovely, happy weeks. On this episode, I was thrilled to be joined by Chloe O. Davis, the author of The Queen's English. It is literally a dictionary from A to Z about all gay slang, lingo, terminology, language. It's a stunning book to look at. It's colourful, it's bright, it's such a fantastic educational, informative tool. I had such a fantastic time talking to Chloe. I was a little bit nervous just because she is so smart and well spoken, and I really put in the prep for this one, and I had a blast. And I feel like she's a ray of sunshine, and I had a great time. I was learning more just by talking to her. I really, truly enjoyed it. I can't recommend this book enough. I originally bought it for a friend as a gift, and then had to buy myself one. I would recommend every person, be you LGBTQ plus or otherwise. Enjoy the episode. Remember, we are on social media from Instagram, Facebook and Twitter, so when you're enjoying something, let me know. Share the love. And you can also go to iTunes, give us a cheeky 5-star rating and a nice review so the podcast can continue to grow and get bigger and bigger, and we can have more conversations with more people. In the meantime, here's this week's episode. Enjoy. Can you tell my voice is going a little bit today? I feel like Kermit the Frog. Hello, I am overjoyed and so thankful to introduce Chloe, the author of The Queen's English, to the podcast. Hello, Chloe.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. So I want to do my introduction justice, but please
Okay.
pick me up if I forget anything. You are a actor, dancer, performer, creative body energy, and you're also now an author. You have written The Queen's English, the LGBTQIA plus Dictionary of Lingo, Colloquial Phrases. Whew, that's a
Tongue
mouthful, and
twister.
I'm not very
Tongue
good at
twister.
talking. Yes. So thank you so much for joining me on the Champions of Happy today. You're currently in New York, is that right?
Yes, New York City. I'm here.
Uh, I love New York. It is one of my favorite places in the world. Are you born and bred there, from there?
Well, actually, I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, so that's kind of like Midwest United States. But I've been in New York for at least the past 10 years. So,
Ah, I love it so
yeah.
much. I've been there twice before. I mean, granted, I've been there on a holiday, so I imagine it's a very different vibe when you live there. But the moment I was there, I was like, this is the place I need to be if it wasn't London. But so jealous. How do you find New York generally? Do you like it?
Well, New York is amazing. I mean, it's home for me because, like you said, I'm in their entertainment industry here. So my work is here. So I love it. I love the culture. I love the diversity. I love the arts. Absolutely. I love Broadway. So New York is great. But I also like to say New York is like a love-hate relationship, or I'm not married, but maybe it's considered like a marriage, right? You have those moments where you're like, I love you. And you have those moments where you're like, oh, you're getting on my nerves. And I think with New York, because there's so many people here, and maybe the trains aren't working right, or maybe the bus is just too crowded, or Times Square is just so crowded. You have those moments that you're like, oh, New York is a lot. Especially, so the thing here, you can have a car, sure, but you don't need it. You'll get in a taxi, take the train or Uber. It's kind of like, London,
It
right?
sounds
But
very similar to London. Yeah, very.
right. Yeah, it's very similar. But it's those things too, like when you need to go get groceries and you have to carry all of your groceries, back home, whether
Uh,
it's like 20 blocks and getting on the train. So I think those are the moments where I'm like, oh man, oh, New York, but I love it. I think New York's incredible. It just has such a great, vibrant spirit. It's a place like no other. And particularly after the pandemic, it's really great. Well, the pandemic's still kind of going on, but just to see New York reopen, because we all know New York was very much of a hot spot and, experienced a lot of COVID cases. So just to see the city returning, like restaurants opening and more people on the streets, because New York was empty. I mean, no one
oh,
was outside. It was unheard of. Like you could find parking on the street. You know what I mean? That's like That's very, very odd. So it's just really beautiful to see the city come back to life.
Oh, good. I was going to ask about COVID and have you noticed a massive difference? Because I imagine our lockdown is a tad different to yours. Are things generally open again, or is it still a slow burner?
Yes. So New York was probably one of the last, New York State, particularly New York City, was probably one of the last areas in the US that, you know, opened up. The kind of a lot of the other states had opened up prior to New York, but and because New York had such high cases, amounts of cases, the city was very, very particular when it opens. Um, and a lot happened with particularly the entertainment industry, my industry. Broadway's just now making its reopening after like almost a year and a half. So yeah, I mean, it hit really hard. So that's why I think it's really nice to, see more people in the park and restaurants and things like that.
Hmm. Well, COVID aside, we're not here to talk COVID. We're here to talk you and your
Okay.
amazing, amazing book. And before we dive into all that, we do start the podcast with the segment Happy Moment. Would you mind sharing your happy moment with us?
We talked a little bit about Broadway, and I think my happy moment is that Broadway's back, and I actually went to see my first Broadway since we've opened, and
Oh,
it
what did you
was called
see?
Passover. It's called Passover, at the August Wilson Theater, and it was amazing. And when the stage manager made the announcement, that the show's starting, and of course everyone keep your mask up, but it was like a standing ovation just to be able to be back in the theaters. It was really electrifying. So I think that was my happy moment. It was just so great to feel live theater again.
Mm. Oh, it's so nice to hear. I saw a show 2 weekends ago and it felt strange but exhilarating being back. And I feel like everyone kind of had that tingly energy about them. So,
Hmm.
lovely. So thank you for sharing that. So a little bit before we get into the book, I wanted to get into to know you a bit better. So
Hmm.
I know from the book and your website that you are a actor, dancer, performer. Can you give us a little bit of background as to what you've done, who you are?
Yeah, so again, I'm Chloe Davis, and I guess a little bit of my resume that I started off in concert dance with the company, the Philadelphia Dance Company, also known as Philadanco, based in Philadelphia, PA. I transitioned into musical theater. So I've done an off Broadway called Cabin in the Sky. I've filmed, I've been part of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Actually, that's on Netflix now.
Ah,
That features Viola Davis and the late Chadwick Boseman. I did Jesus Christ Superstar Live on NBC, and that was with John Legend and Alice Cooper and Sarah Bareilles. That was exciting. I made my Metropolitan Opera debut with Porgy and Bess 2 seasons ago, I guess, before COVID. So that was exciting. And I've done some other television shows, Tell Me a Story, another show called Harlem. And I'm excited that I will make my Broadway debut with the new show Paradise Square.
how exciting. Oh my God, that's incredible. You're so talented.
Thank you.
I'm kind of blown away, speechless. So now you're also an author, which is incredible. So I know the background of the book, having read the bio and the intro, but if you could briefly explain what the book is and where it came from.
Absolutely. So the Queen's English, the dictionary of LGBTQIA plus lingo and colloquial phrases, is actually a celebration of the spectrum of identity. It celebrates, it affirms, and brings visibility to, the diversity that expresses what human identity is, right? That's our sexual orientation, that's our sexual anatomy, that's our romantic orientation, our gender identity, our gender expression. It's all very vast and beautiful and complex and intersectional. And so this is a dictionary that celebrates that uniqueness of who we are. It's also a great resource to just dive into those conversations about what inclusivity looks like, what diversity looks like, what does intersectionality looks like, and have those deeper conversations too about privilege, whether it's cisgender privilege, whether it's male privilege, whether it's white privilege, right? But to understand that marginalization happens, oppression has happened and happens. And particularly when we talk about the LGBTQI plus community, that's something that is heavily embedded in our community. And being able to kind of dive in and see the beauty of who we are, so that way we understand each other. So just it's truly a celebration, a learning tool, but and it's really engaging. It celebrates over 800 terms used to describe our collective gay and queer experiences. It dives into, the lesbian spectrum, or the animal kingdom, that's from like the gay community, or also words that are particular to non-binary communities or gender non-conforming communities. And it just goes on and on. But it also dives into the leather scene and, ballroom scene, which we know more about. If you don't, if you've ever watched RuPaul Drag Race, which I think most of us have, it's kind of bringing the ballroom scene more mainstream. But, the ballroom scene was created by, mostly Black, Latinx, people of color, to create a safe space of belonging, right? Because of experiencing homophobia or transphobia or racism. And the ballroom scene was the place that you can feel safe and empowered and celebrated. And you had the balls to celebrate your artistic spirit. So that's the other little thing too. It's not just about terms, but it's also about the history. So I like to say the Queen's English is about identity, history, and pride. So, language is created because we need to articulate who we are and experiences that possibly mainstream didn't articulate in a way that feels affirming, empowering. And so we create language. And I just wanted to be able to document our language and the historical creation of the language, right? The language we hear now, particularly in like 2021, soon to be 2022, is very different in the 1960s, very different in the 1980s during the AIDS crisis, right? So it's one of those things, it's language, but it's also, let's talk about the historical relevance of why the language was created or how the language has evolved and transformed, right? When we talk about queer, queer was, well, if we think of queer in a very traditional sense, you don't just mean something that's particular, or peculiar or, strange, right? But then it became, queers something that was derogatory, right? To talk about someone who, was gay, or talk about homosexuality, right? And over time, particularly during the AIDS crisis, queer was reappropriated and given more power to the community to say, like, yes, I'm queer and I feel empowered and affirmed. And, you may have one definition, but I have mine. And I'm going to take this word and give it, power and give it positivity. And so that's why we see more people, particularly like millennials and Gen Zs, using the word queer, was because it went through that evolution. And so I think that's really important too. It's not just about the dictionary, but it's also giving us insight as to the history of words, the evolution of words, the etymology of words. So yeah.
It itself is a beautiful book. It's from the exterior, the interior, and I love how you brought up the animal section. I'm still trying to work out what I am. I'm not a twink anymore. Not quite an otter. I feel like a twas. I was a twink. Oh,
Okay.
I'm not a twunk. I'm a twas. Okay. I think I'm a twas. Twas a twink. I'm aging twink. I'm not sure. I'm an old man now. And I really feel it is a really great educational tool. I knew, because I am a 30-something-year-old now, so I knew a lot of the terms already and the history, but I think it's a tool every LGBTQ plus person should have at whatever age. I think, especially for people who are just coming out and just finally just coming into the community, it's such a useful, handy tool. And I was reading it, learning tools, terms I'd never heard of before, and I was like, oh, hadn't heard of that one. That's an interesting one.
Yes, I think that's great. Thank you for that support.
No, absolutely. And I love how at the beginning it really explains more the history of the language coming from the Harlem Black gay scene and the ballroom scene. And I was like, that is still an area I'm a white man, and it's still quite an area I'm not too familiar with. So reading it through here and on programs like Legendary and Pose, it's like, oh, it's not all just from RuPaul's Drag Race. As much as we will love RuPaul's Drag Race, there's a lot more history
There's
behind it than
history.
just that. It's not just
Exactly.
yes queen. It's
Yes,
it's
exactly.
important for us to all know that.
I'm happy you actually brought that up, and that was another big reason of creating this dictionary, because what happens, in the larger LGBTQ IA community, but particularly in the Black American community, Black American culture, and Black gay culture, Black trans culture, Black queer culture, appropriation happens. And, I think with like how, of course, RuPaul's Drag Race is very mainstream, it's international. But what's happening is you're hearing these words, but you're not knowing necessarily the meaning or who created it, because the faces that are actually saying the words may not be the faces that originated the words. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I see, particularly white people, or white gay men or white queens, saying these words, but it didn't come from that community. It comes from a Black community, a Black gay queer community, right? And also a Black, you know, Latinx community. So I think it was really important to talk about the Harlem Renaissance. So when we think about the word in the life, when we talk about in the closet, these these phrases are over a century old. They were coined back in the early 1920s. When we hear the word dyke, right, that's another word like queer, right? When words that have been at once were derogatory but have been reclaimed by some members of the community. And I say some members because not everyone reclaims them and feels like it's empowering. So I do want to make sure that is valid, that there are different experiences. But particularly dyke comes from the word bull, dagger, bull dyke. And that's another word that came from the Harlem Renaissance. And it just clearly meant Black women who were attracted to women were bull dykes, bull daggers, or, that's your sexual orientation. Or when we talk about gender expression, you would have women who oftentimes had more of a masculine flair, right? Like decide, wanted to, we call it butch, right? But that was also considered someone who was a bull dyke or bull dagger. So it was a negative connotation. You know what I mean? It just is what it is. It was before lesbian. Lesbian didn't come into the scene until decades after, right? There were other words that were used before gay and lesbian. And bull dyke, bull dagger happened to be one. However, it got shortened to dyke. It got taken out of the community, right? The power of language and how people can use language that's not theirs to harm others. And this was one of them. Like dyke, dyke was one of them. But again, just like queer, some members of the community, took it back, gave it its power. And so some people feel very empowered and, affirmed by being called a dyke, or calling themselves a dyke. It's not that you call someone else that. And I think that's the other thing that I like to educate in the dictionary about language and labels, is that the only labels we should use for each other are the labels that that person has self-assigned. Any other thing is incorrect. That's not, it's not respectful. It's not admirable. So if someone has identified themselves as something, then that is what we call them. You know what I mean?
Mm. No,
Yeah.
totally. I'm learning new now. I didn't realize lesbian wasn't the original word. I also always
Oh
assumed dyke
no.
came
Oh my
after
gosh.
lesbian. I'm learning so much. I
No.
love this. Oh.
Lesbian actually is like more, I don't want to like throw out a date, but definitely it was after the 1960s, probably after the 1970s.
Oh my God.
I have to dig in and do a little bit more research, but yes, but before the word, even before, so even I know it was definitely after the 1960s, because in the 1940s the ideas of butch femme binary was created, right? So we have to remember like how this world has evolved. When we talk about sexism, racism, genderism, but in the 1940s, that was the first time, pretty much women were allowed to go out without men, right? And what was happening were these dive bars were being, right, blows your mind, 1940s. But women, particularly in the US, would go to, starting these like lesbian dive bars. I say lesbian, but it's just women who, were attracted to women. And what was happening is, either you were a femme, right? You were femme, so you were a woman who was attracted to other women and presented yourself in a more feminine, traditionally feminine way, or you were butch, right? And you were a woman who liked another woman or attracted to women, and you presented yourself in a more masculine flair. So that's when the butch femme binary was created in the 1940s. And then the Kiki girls, right? We've heard his name because when we think of Kiki, we think of maybe possibly the ballroom scene. And it just means to have a good time, socialize, to laugh. But the Kiki girls were those who did not did not decide to put themselves in this binary, right? They didn't want to necessarily represent themselves in a feminine or only a feminine or masculine way. And they didn't want to only be attracted to those who were feminine or masculine. And it's interesting because they were actually kind of the outcast in the community, right? If you were a Kiki girl, it's kind of like you were kind of like shunned a little bit because you weren't fitting within the binary. So we have a problem with wanting to make sure everyone fits in like these binaries. And I think what Queen's English does is just kind of teaching you that it's not about binaries. You know, it is about a spectrum. It is about the vastness and the diversity.
How was your journey making the book? Was the plan from the get-go to say, I'm going to write a book one day about gay lingo, or how did it first originate?
Well, so I talked a little bit about where I first started my professional career, and it was a company called Philadelphia in Philadelphia. And so this was back in 2006. So I'm actually kind of telling my age a little bit, but a lot of my friends in the company were gay men, Black gay men, but also part of the ballroom scene. So some of the first, and even being in the entertainment industry, there's just some words that I just knew already. Like I've heard fierce and work since I was like 10 years old. You know what I mean? Because as a dancer, this is what it is. But a lot of also my teachers were Black gay men, right? So I was kind of already being introduced to the language. But when I was in Philadelphia, I was being introduced to a lot more vibrant phrases, right? So like, you know, thinking of like, what's the T, or tens across the board, or, you know, OVA. Of course, Slay came before Beyonce, everyone. Just wanted to let you know. But, you know, I was learning these phrases and terms, and I said after about, I want to say like 50 or something, because I'm a nerd also. So I was kind of like, I was jotting them down. And what, you know, a lot of times when you're defining a word, particularly if it's considered slang, I don't consider this language slang. This is cultural language. But when someone considers language slang, they, you know, you kind of define it with slang. And so what I was doing, no pun intended to my UK audience, but when I was doing it, I would literally, you know, think of the Oxford Dictionary and try to find, you know, a way to define the slang word with you know, a very academic English definition. And it was actually kind of funny. And it was a pastime. This is what we will do, like when we're traveling on our tour bus, or you know, I would hear a word and I'm like, hey, does it mean, you know, this? And everyone would like, yeah, it does. And so that was the thing we did. And after about like 50 words or so, you know, I said, there's this language is like fully developed. There should be a dictionary. And a friend challenged me and said, well, yeah, when you write it, call it the Queen's English. So that's also how I got its name. But that's what happened. And I don't know if I really thought I was going to do it, but I did it 15 years later. And it, you know, it's complete, over 800 terms. So that's how it started. But, you know, it's been an experience within itself. It started with, you know, learning more about the ballroom scene. But as an artist, it's something interesting that I always get to be implanted in really amazing spaces where, you know, people are so authentic within themselves, right? So I'm, you know, I'm in spaces with people who feel affirmed or feel like they can truly express their identity. So that's how I was able to meet other people that were part of the leather community or part of, you know, the lesbian scene. I'm bisexual, you know, part of, you know, the gender non-conforming, non-binary, you know, communities, the trans communities, the Black trans communities, the Muslim queer communities, the Asian gay and queer communities. You know, I was able to just continue to meet people who would continue to introduce me to more people when I told them I was writing a dictionary. And it was kind of like a celebration. It was kind of like, yeah, this is awesome. Absolutely. And we just kept diving into words and just more, I would have continue to have like interviews and group discussions on, gay and queer language. And I just kept documenting. And again, 15 years later, over 800 terms later, almost 900 terms, ta-da,
Did you find when you told people you were doing the book, people would start to say, "Oh, do you know this word? Oh, do you know this word?"
It was excitement all the time. It was, some conversations, it would just be so many words. I'm like, wow. And I think it was great because if I was in a different, community or a different part of the US or the world, and I would hear the word again, I'm like, wow, okay, that's great. It's affirming. It's like, oh no, this is truly a word that's used in multiple places. But yeah, it would just be excitement on like teaching words and, digging out definitions or plural, right? Because there's sometimes more than one way to define a word. And I wanted to make sure, again, that validity was there. And then also it was such a learning experience for myself, but for the people I was talking to, because what makes this dictionary so special, again, because it covers the diversity, of who we are, the intersectionality of our race, of our age, of our relationship orientations, right? Of our sexual orientation, of our, gender expression, gender identity. And I'm able to dive in and bring visibility to all of that diversity. And that's not something that has happened before. A lot of times it's written from one lens, and a lot of times it's from a white gay lens, and it may have, lesbian, a lesbian lens there, but is it a white lesbian lens, or is it a lesbian lens that includes people of color, right? So that's the thing. It's like, this is truly a celebration of all identity, not just the majority view. There is no majority. There is no normality. The normality that's there is the fact that it's diverse. So that's the celebration of the dictionary.
Amazing. Did you find when it came to, because obviously you're based in America, but when it came to other countries like the UK, for example, how did you learn about words and terms from
Yeah,
the UK, for example?
Clary.
Yeah, sure. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, Larry.
absolutely. Yeah, so I love research. I think that's something that I found doing this dictionary, that I love research. I'm good at it, so I just started to dig in. And also, I had a consultant, a UK consultant. Her name is Paula Akpan. She also wrote the foreword for the UK edition, and she was so very helpful with diving into material. But one thing I can say about research, for when I was working on the US version from like 2006 through 2010, you didn't have a lot of resources, right? It's like the resources had to come from primary sources. And what I'm finding now, in these last couple of years, there are a lot more resources now that dive deeper into, gay and queer identity, culture, and representation. And so I think also that was very, very helpful, for me to be able to dive into these like online resources and, pull things. I love Stonewall. That was a great resource to use, and being able to talk with individuals there. And, again, I tried to use kind of like the same process, like, friends that I know that are from the UK connecting me with other people. So I tried to use the same aspect. And because there's a portion in the dictionary called Did You Know? And that dives into, again, kind of like that nuance, the etymology, the history, the evolution. And I thought it was really important to make sure to have that information in there for the UK. But, it takes a village. And so I'm really happy, that I was able to have that type of assistance, particularly from Paula, and Paula connecting me with other people in the UK to help write the UK version.
Have you ever been to the UK yourself?
I have. It's been a while. I am gonna make it over this year. I'm just gonna try to figure out when. It's just, there were with the COVID protocols, but they've been lifted now. You don't have to quarantine for so long, but you had to quarantine for 10 days. And I was like, okay, well, there's my trip. So I'm gonna make my way over there. I have to. I mean, I have to visit, all of the amazing bookstores that have the Queen's English, and just, celebrate over there.
Yes. How does it feel knowing that you're most likely now going to be quoted in a lot of university lectures and essays and all sorts of things? Because this is gold for a student
Thank
trying to
you.
reference I would be
Oh
using this
man.
when I was like at university.
I didn't think of that, but I think that's exciting. I think
Yeah.
that's exciting. I think the most important thing is that we're talking about it. As long as we're having these open conversations, healthy conversations about what identity looks like. I think that's the goal. I want the healthy conversations to be, through universities, through corporate, corporate settings, charities, organizations, but most importantly, families.
The book does acknowledge that language over time does change. And I know you
Mm-hmm.
briefly mentioned it before, especially the word queer, because in the UK, queer, fag, puff
Mm-hmm.
originally were negative words, and over time they've been reclaimed as more words that we try to use in empowerment. And I remember having a conversation with an older person of an older generation who was very much of the time where queer was used as a
Mm-hmm.
negative word. And it dawned on me the other day, it's like, when did I learn? Because I'm from the north, and the north of
Mm-hmm.
England, and the north, I mean, even within the UK, the language is different wherever you go, and how it's
Yes.
used. I personally don't like the word fag to call
Mm-hmm.
myself said, but I know
Mm-hmm.
others wouldn't mind. And the word queer, that was an interesting one for me, because I always thought queer was not necessarily a negative, but and lifestyle is the wrong word as well. Being queer is you're born queer. Um, but I don't know how to. I'm not very good at articulating this.
No,
This
I think
phrase.
I think I know what you're saying, and I guess that's why when I was explaining, wanting to show the validity of both sides and how we receive words, right? Words,
Mm.
the same word can empower and hurt at the same time, based on how it directly interceded your life, right? So someone who's 60 plus or even 50 plus, and experienced more of queer being thrown at them with malice um, um, and hurtfulness, they're not going to connect to that word, regardless if it is evolved or not. It's just like that's not something I feel that I want to be part of my vocabulary to identify who I am. And the same thing with you when you were talking about faggot. You're like, look, some people may feel good about that, but I don't, and that's okay, because I think that what I want to articulate again is that identity is a personal journey, and the labels that we give ourselves, they are ours and ours alone, based on our experience and how we want to feel empowered. So that's the power of language. And I think the other thing that's most important is we have to respect, give the validity and compassion to understanding that there are multiple ways people can interpret the word. And that's why also in the Queen's English, you see those definitions. And also the usage note will say this term was once derogatory, but some, or maybe derogatory, but some members of the community have reappropriated it as a more positive self-acclamation, right? Again, it's about just telling the truth. The truth is there are different experiences, how people interpret this word. And the truth is there's validity in both of those experiences. And I think that's, again, what we have to realize, that just because it's my way doesn't mean it's the right way. It's the right way for you, but it may not be the right way for the other person. So I think that when it comes to like understanding our differences, being compassionate to who we are, who we each of us are evolving into, I think that's kind of the common thread of what will help our evolution. Because fact is, if faggot doesn't feel good to you, it doesn't have to feel good to you. And you don't have to say, oh, no one should call you that if that doesn't feel good to you. If you have not identified yourself as such, then no one should call you that. Just like queer, if it's like, look, I'm not queer. Someone can say, no, I'm not queer, I'm gay, period. Or no, I'm not queer, I'm pan. If you want to be particular like that, that's fine too. It's about respecting who we are. We are all unique, we are all diverse, we're different. And our uniqueness is what helps humanity evolve and grow, and flourish. So I think that's the larger conversation. It's like we have to open our minds to understand that we're not supposed to fit in boxes, and we're not supposed to walk in a line. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to exist. We're supposed to evolve. We're supposed to encourage, inspire. That's the truth of humanity.
See, this is why you're the academic and I'm the hobbyist podcaster. That was such a beautiful answer. Thank you for that. That made a lot of sense, and I can still feel my brain clicking even as I'm having this conversation, which is great because we're talking and we're discussing. Thank you for that. You touched on it a little bit before, but did you discover anything within yourself or your personal life when you
Oh,
were learning new terms and such? Did anything like
so
click and go, oh, this is what I've been trying to
yes.
say?
Yes, I think that was one of the reasons I continued creating, because I would have a resource to who I am, right? Because I mean, I didn't meet someone who was openly bisexual until my 20s. That's, to me, that's problematic. And I didn't necessarily know if like how I identified was valid, was acceptable, was okay. And so I wanted to find more words to help me along my journey. And I write this in my introduction that learning words about heteroflexible, bi-curious, bisexual, demisexual, kind of showed the evolution of my identity. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember when the idea in my mind was like, oh, I like her. You know what I mean? And I remember also when I was like, hey, I I know who I'm attracted to, but it feels uncomfortable when I'm not in spaces that welcome it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like truly being out in all spaces. So the word of that could be like closet or semi-closet. I remember experiencing that. And I also remember being firm and saying, hey, this is who I am. And I also, have like understood and experienced or had a journey with being polyamorous, and I also know that I'm demisexual. So, and all of these terms, you just have to grab the dictionary to look them up.
Right.
But if you talk about, for instance, demi means, partial or half. And when we talk about sexual, you could be, if you're asexual, it's like a one spectrum where it's like a lack of desire for, sexual relationships versus allosexual. And that is a desire for sexual relationships. And then you have that demi right in the middle. And for me, it's the idea of where, yes, the attraction is there, the sexual desire is there, but there's more to it. There needs to be this trust and this emotional and mental bond, and connection that has to be there for it to happen, right? So, understanding more about myself to say, okay, that's me. You're not weird. It's true. There's a word for it. So having going through the dictionary and finding these terms and saying, wow, that's me, made me feel empowered. So it also has helped me truly advocate, for people understanding the spectrum of identity. So that way people can feel empowered in who they are. I say this too, like with those who may consider like, oh yes, I'm straight, I'm just a cis het person. That means like cisgender heterosexual person. Cool. But guess what? There are more parts to you. There's also your relationship orientation, like, is it open? Is it poly? Is it monogamous? You know what I mean? Is it kink? Is it vanilla? Like, what are those other aspects of you? That's also part of your identity. So again, it's that deeper conversation of just pulling back the layers of who we are, because it makes us special. It makes us unique.
Oh, I have a really vague, boring question. You probably been asked a million times, but do you have any favorite terms or words?
I have something I like to say is that the dictionary is full of zaddies and daddies and mommies and MBs and bears and twinks and otters. Oh my! But
That's amazing. Oh, I love that. I love a zaddy as well. So we are coming to the end of the podcast, but it
yeah.
is a really truly stunning book. Just from the exterior, the interior. I love the pages that teach a bit more about just history. There's a section about the pride flags. There's a section
Mm-hmm.
like we've mentioned before, the animal kingdom, the hanky code, which
Mm-hmm.
I knew about, but I didn't really know about until I read the book. So if you want to find out more, buy the book. What's next for you and the book and going forward in the future?
Well, I think it's really important that this dictionary can also be formatted for our younger generation. So I would love to do a children's edition or youth edition. I feel
Oh,
like this
amazing.
dictionary could, be of course appropriate for, those secondary and college students. And it's also something that you can read together as a family, especially if they're someone like, 14, 13, and just have deeper in those conversations, and then kind of, just skip over some of those terms that are there that, focus on actual sexual encounterments. But, I want something that is a little bit more digestible for those who are like 7 to 10, want to create a resource to help younger people find that exploration with their identity. And it feels good. It feels affirming. It feels right. So
That's amazing. Yeah, I think, like you say, the book is, I think, could be read by the families, older people, but for a younger book would be amazing. And I think that, yeah, that would
thank you.
go off the shelves, especially now, especially when younger people are really discovering themselves and coming out a lot younger than like when they used to
Exactly.
back in my day.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I don't know if this is going to work, but I thought we just play a very, very quick, short game. How would you feel if I picked like 3 random words from the book and then you describe them as best as you can and give an example of how that word would be used, like you do in the book?
That's
So
great.
I'm
That's great.
flipping to a completely random page. Flit.
A flit. A flit is a gay person, someone who identifies with homosexuality. And it was an old term. It's actually something that was based in like the 1950s, I think, is when that term came out. But it is an older term.
Ah, okay. An example you give is, at last we have arrived, the gay beach where every flit is wearing a Speedo and holding a cocktail. I will be using the word flit forever now.
Okay.
Because I often go to the beach with a Speedo and a cocktail. Dapper.
Dapper. So dapper is a look that it's kind of like, if we say swag now, it was like dapper. It was is a more proper way of saying it, but it's just someone who looks, you oftentimes someone who is male or mask, right? And someone who is very much dressed in a way that's the presentation is very refined. And I like to say swag, but swag that's refined.
Nice. And the great part about the book is you have a section where it says, want more info? And you say,
Mm-hmm.
think buttoned up or handsome, which is also
Mm-hmm.
really
Mm-hmm.
helpful. And so for the last, for the last word, power top.
Oh, well, a power to top.
This
Okay,
is all
so
totally random.
this is great. This is great. So a top, when we talk about male to male sexual connection, intercourse, it's usually someone who is penetrating, right? And you can say, even if it's not male to male, but just person to person, it's someone who could be also dominant and penetrating in some type of way. So it doesn't have to be just a male. It could be someone who's non-binary. It could be someone who's femme. But yes, it could be someone who's non-binary, male, female, but just someone who is dominant or penetrating. And power just means you are dominant in that. That like that is your thing. You control it. You are the dominator. You are the dominant top.
Like we
Thank
could
you
do.
so much,
No,
James. This is
thank
great.
you. Absolute pleasure. You are so articulate and so well spoken, and I feel like I'm learning just by listening to you, and I love it. Thank you so much. I love the book. I genuinely do love the book. I bought it for a friend as a gift, then I had to buy it for
Yes.
myself.
Yes.
It's a stunning book. Where can people get it?
Well, you can definitely get it at your independent bookstores, which I definitely recommend. There's Amazing Store, of course, Gay's the word. But you can also, of course, get it at Amazon or Penguin Random House. So Penguin's UK site, you can definitely go on there and purchase it. But yeah, it should be pretty much anywhere.
Yeah. And how, if our listeners want to find out more about yourself or the book itself, do you have any social media feeds you can share?
Yes, absolutely. So at the Queen's English US, that is on Instagram and also Facebook, but also you visit the website, www.thequeensenglishus.com.
Well, thank you so much. I can't recommend the book highly enough. This has been an absolute pleasure, and it's really brightened up my Tuesday. So
thank you
very much. We'll say goodbye for now, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again in the future.
Sounds great. Thank you.